I belong to a few unofficial crime stats groups that's largely community centered, which sends updates of shooting in area A, B, or C. X number of people injured, code blue. So it's not necessarily always quantifiable. And of course, not every murder or shooting is reported as a media statement by the South African police. But our latest crime stats showing that murder is down 9.5% nationally compared to the same period last year. There are 546 fewer people killed. On paper, that sounds significant, almost a 10% drop. But the reality is still 5,100 people murdered in just 3 months. It's an average of 58 people killed every day. And of course, here in the Western Cape, that number feels largely very disconnected from people's lived reality. The province still recorded almost 1,000 murders in just 90 days. The areas of Mfuleni, Delft, Guguletu, Khayelitsha remaining among the deadliest precincts in the country, and more than 90% of South Africa's gang-related murders happening here in the Western Cape. But let's take a look at this picture now. Chandre Gould, Senior Research Fellow in Justice and Violence Prevention at the Institute for Security Studies. Good morning, Chandre. Hope you've been well. Just statistically, if you look at 9.5% drop in murders, you think, wow, this is really a significant decrease. But is this a real trend? Is it too early to celebrate? What are we seeing in terms of a national versus a provincial picture here in the Western Cape?
Good morning, Lester. Yes, this is continuing a downward trend that we saw in the previous quarter as well. And I think the one thing to say is that the one most reliable crime statistic we have is murder, because, of course, a dead body can't be ignored. So whereas one can question the extent to which other crimes are being reported, murder is a fairly reliable, certainly statistic over time. So I think we can take some comfort from the fact that there is a decrease, even though that doesn't necessarily match with the lived reality of many people, particularly in the Western Cape. But I'll tell you what's driving murder down is the double-digit decreases in trio crimes. So we saw that at a national level, carjacking, residential robbery, and robbery at business premises have come down by almost 20, well, in some cases more than 20% over the last quarter, which is good news. So that's one of the things that's driving the murder rate down. I think two of the things that I think are noteworthy here in these crime statistics is that 233 of those 5,000 murders are as a consequence of domestic violence, and 231 are cases where alcohol was involved. Yeah. Now, if we look at the Western Cape in particular, the causes of murder are in this order. The first, of course, is gang-related. 225 murders in the Western Cape as a consequence of gang activity. But 206, close behind, is caused by arguments, misunderstandings, and road rage. There's a lot of anger, quite understandably, in our country. Driving murder.
And these require different strategies. Gang-related violence that requires intelligence, detective work, getting people behind bars who are involved in the illicit and gang economy, whereas that interpersonal violence, it's violence between people who generally know each other, socialize with each other, in many cases maybe even live with each other. That's going to require a totally different strategy. Are we capacitated enough to have different strategies to influence these different causes of violence in South Africa?
Lester, I would have to say I don't think we are. One of the things that I think there's a dual picture happening in relation. Let me start with policing. There's a dual picture happening in relation to policing. The reductions in the trio crimes, carjacking, residential robbery, and robbery at business premises, is an indication that there might be green shoots in relation to intelligence-led policing as far as that kind of organized crime is concerned. What I'm concerned about is that we see a reduction in the number of firearms being collected by the police. So there's a category of crimes that they call community-driven, and then there's a category of crime which are police-led. And that's where they report how many firearms the police are collecting, and it looks to me as though we are not seeing an increase in the number of firearms, illegal firearms that the police are actually getting in raids. And that's a concern because, of course, firearms are driving murder, particularly in gang-related areas. But when it comes to other crimes, now here is something that I think is really important. Now keep in mind that assault and serious assault are very underreported crimes. We still see nearly 20,000 serious assaults. That's assaults with intent to do grievous bodily harm in the last 3 months. Nearly 20,000 in the country, of which nearly 14,500 were in our homes. So what that means is that the violence in our homes is going unchecked. Yeah. And that kind of violence leads to other forms of violence. We're not doing nearly enough to address violence that children experience and that we experience in our homes. And that violence comes from past experience and rage, really. Deep anger at injustice, anger at a past that has left us behind. There's a lot of anger in our country, and it's coming out in violence.
And a lot of violence is also driven by vigilante crimes, people taking the law into their own hands. That also is a significant part of our crime stats. We have a voice note with a question.
Lester, good morning. This is a very tongue-in-cheek comment, but hearing about the analysts talk about the reduction in carjackings and murder and stuff, and you were saying, with rising costs, what are people cutting back on? Well, maybe the criminals are going, it's just too expensive to go out there and steal and kill people. I'll stay at home and watch Netflix instead. Have a safe day, Jonathan from Weinberg.
Tongue-in-cheek comment there, but I don't want to correlation isn't causation. I know that the acting police minister says, and he said on Friday, we probably need a more qualitative study into this drop. But at the same time, again, I don't draw a correlation, but something to note. SA Breweries reporting a decline in sales, particularly beer, because of a strained economy. We've previously spoken about the link between the consumption on alcohol and violence. Could this be a factor adding to a national decline?
Absolutely. It definitely can. I mean, there's no question, and we saw this very clearly during the period of the COVID lockdown, that there was, although people did find ways to keep drinking, there was a definite reduction in the consumption of alcohol and a dramatic reduction in murders. Of course, after the COVID lockdown, murder jumped right back up to even levels higher than they were before COVID. But we see a very clear link between alcohol use and violence, and that is because alcohol lowers your barriers to behavior, and you can be more easily triggered when you're drunk, of course, and you're not thinking rationally when you're drunk, and you might, your anger at a small humiliation feels much greater when you're under the influence of alcohol.
Jonathan, a very tongue-in-cheek question, but a very serious answer there from Chandre Gould, Senior Research Fellow in Justice and Violent Prevention.